Welcome back to the Honest Marketing Podcast, where you learn proven strategies to grow your business without selling your soul. I'm your host, Travis Albritton, and in this episode, we're going to do something a little different. Normally, it's me kind of pontificating on a particular point or strategy or question, or interviewing somebody that has an expertise and a point of view that I think is really valuable for business owners that want to grow their business ethically. So throughout the week, throughout the month, I do a lot of strategy calls with clients, with people that are interested in podcasting for their business, for themselves, because that's what my business is. I produce podcasts for businesses and entrepreneurs. I was on a coaching call with a client and we were talking through podcast guest strategies, which I'm a huge fan of for a number of reasons. The first reason from a marketing perspective is it allows you to get a long period of exposure with a highly targeted audience. And so if you have a business doing lawn care, you can target podcasts that talk about lawn care. And then you know the people that are listening to those podcasts are interested in the thing that you sell. And so not only are you able to go after highly specific audiences, but then the consumption of podcasts is really phenomenal, where if you have a 40-minute interview, 90% of the people that listen to it will listen to the whole thing, which is unheard of on the internet. You cannot get 40 minutes of somebody's attention anywhere else. And so I'm a huge fan of that just because you're able to share your ideals, your values, what makes you different, and have an extended non-salesy conversation with a prospect that's highly qualified to then make you, in their mind, the answer to their problem. And so for this particular client, Matt, we are talking through how to approach other podcasts, both about having them as a guest on his podcast, but then also how to turn around and be a guest on their podcast. And this is a really powerful strategy. And so I just wanted to share just this unfiltered clip from our coaching call. And then on the back end of that, give you a couple things that you can do to implement it right away. So here it is, my coaching call with Matt. The things that I had were more tips on guest strategies, like how to get guests and how to be a guest. And I know that's something we've talked about as being really valuable and important to you. So I just kind of walk you through that. And then just continue to get clarity on what kind of, and this isn't to beat a dead horse, but just so we can further refine down when you're targeting podcasts that are going to be worth your time. Like it helps to have filters for yes or no, should I pursue this podcast or not? Because like in your guest spreadsheet, most of those guests are more spiritual leaders, not necessarily business leaders. Though some of them have some practical business acumen to them. And so that would lean in a different direction than this is primarily about business, but for Christian entrepreneurs without using all the hyper-religious language. Like if someone sees John Mark Comer, they're going to think, oh, this is a spiritual podcast. It's not saying he would be a great guest, but.
Yeah. And all I did was throw some names in there to start. I was just like, here's a file. Let's start here. And and he was top. But my hope is that, if, it's some future date, I managed to get John Mark Comer, that I could pull those kinds of people into conversations about the business world. Like, of course, you're a spiritual leader. What do you have to say to guys like me that are like, just little old business people trying to stand at the intersection of business and faith? And, so pull them into a business conversation, although that's obviously not their strength. But then on the other side, and I'm going to send you the audio files from today, this guy, Curtis Fenn, that I just talked to. So running a $20 million business, definitely a disciple of Jesus. We were able to straddle that fence through that whole conversation. So that's the perfect, guest.
Yep.
And Chris, I forget his name, that we were emailing back and forth about
Valaton.
Yeah. I haven't listened to a whole lot of his stuff. I started listening to his book, one of his books, but it sounds like he's running a successful business in addition to being a faith leader, or he certainly has run businesses. Whether he still is or not, I wasn't clear, but so those kinds of people would be, and again, I don't know, if I can swing for what feels like a big league player, or if I need to kind of work my way up to that guy.
Mm-hmm.
But still, even, Curtis, the guy I interviewed today, like nobody's going to know who that guy is, but
Mm-hmm.
he's running a very substantial business, has 6 kids, as also a disciple of Christ. So like he's that guy who's trying to balance all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, the worst thing that you can hear is no. So there's nothing wrong with swinging for the fences. The first podcast interview I ever did was with John Collins, who co-founded the Bible Project.
Wow.
So that was I figured out a way to get in touch to make that request, and he said sure. And then while we
So
were
you didn't have any connection.
nope, no, I just cold emailed.
Nice.
And it was funny, while we were doing the podcast, Tim Mackey walked in and I was like, oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm recording a podcast. Oh, cool. Hey, how's it going? So
Wow.
that was cool. Yeah. So people will say yes for any number of reasons. And we can talk through like how you can make it easier for people to say yes to be a guest on your show. And then also talk through like my favorite strategy for getting on podcasts that you have no business being on, as far as like compared to other guests and their notoriety and relative fame. But I think the thing that first I want to clarify just for me is, are you more interested in being a guest on more business focused podcasts or more spiritual focused podcasts?
Well, I think I don't know if I can answer that question, but my first feeling about it was like my authority is in the business space,
Mm-hmm.
that, I'm, sort of a fanboy of all the spiritual leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So, there has to be a business context,
Mm-hmm.
or I think I'll lose my footing. At least in the short term.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so there's certainly like a powerful testimony in succeeding in business without losing your faith, or without, not at the expense of your faith. And I think that's a relevant conversation for a spiritual based podcast, right? Where, you can pursue growing a business and applying your gift set there as an extension of your ministry, your personal ministry to the world. And so I think that kind of framing is helpful and relevant. And that would be a little bit different than going on a business podcast and talking about how you apply biblical principles and discipleship to the way you do business and how that helps your business grow and be healthy without, jeopardizing your own health. So I think depending on which kind of podcast you go on, you would contextualize the story to fit it. And there's no right or wrong answer. You'll probably do a mix of both. But again, it's just thinking through those kinds of questions are helpful filters now, so you can chart a path and a strategy that's intentional. And you could say, this is the plan. I'm going after business podcasts where I can bring faith into the conversation for this reason. And so if I have to choose between this kind of podcast and a different podcast, I'm going to choose this one for this strategic reason, right? And so it's not that you can't do both or you shouldn't do both, but it's more just about being intentional about what you're doing instead of just saying yes to every opportunity regardless, right? Because your time is valuable and there's an opportunity cost to it. And so you just want to make the best use of your time, so that way it's the most effective for what you're ultimately trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I hear that. I think, and at the very beginning, it's just like, well, I just want some at bats and, use my voice and figure out what's good and what's bad. But I mean, I guess if I'm the guest, then the conversation that I want to have straddles the fence, right? So I guess a reasonable question is that a conversation that host wants to have, or not? So, here's a career entrepreneur who is wrestling as a disciple of Christ and speaking to people with that,
Mm-hmm.
that are fighting that battle.
Yep.
And I think the further that the podcast goes, and then my my book, which will be right along the same vein. The guy that I'm working with on the book side is like, saying, hey, even now you can start saying, I got a book coming out. Might
Mm-hmm.
be a minute. It sure is going to be a minute, but it's coming out, and this is what it's
Yeah.
about. This about walking that out. Um, you know, showing up in your family and your business whilst being, an ever increasing example of Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And and again, there's not a right or wrong answer. It's just about like, if you're going to choose, which one would you choose? And then, okay, well, then let's go in that direction. Does that make sense? Because there's infinite things you could do. You just got to pick the couple things that you want to focus on and then see how it goes. And then you can pivot and you can adjust later on.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have a good answer, but it's a good question. Something
Mhm.
I guess I'll need to spend a minute on.
So whether you've ever pitched yourself to be a guest on somebody else's podcast, or if you have a podcast and you're always trying to find guests, but you aren't sure exactly how to land the whale, the big one, the one that you really want to go after, now you have some really practical things that you can do to stand out, to get direct access to the person that's actually making the decision about scheduling the guests, and understand how to approach it from a service-oriented mindset. Now, if this is something that you want to do for your business, you want to use a podcast as a platform to get access to people that otherwise would not give you the time of day, that's literally what I do. That's what my whole business is about. And so if you're interested in that and exploring what that could look like for your business, I would love to set up a free strategy call with you. You just go to my website, honestpodcasts.com. There'll be a link in the show notes as well if you want to click on that link and go over there. And you can just schedule time on my calendar for us to sit down, talk through your business, talk through your growth and your marketing and your sales goals, and outline whether a podcast makes sense for you at this point in your business, if that's the right investment for you right now. So just go to honestpodcast.com, grab some time on my calendar, and I'd love to connect with you. But hopefully this episode gave you a lot of really practical things to think about if you were looking to be a guest on somebody else's podcast or to find guests for yours. And until next time, be honest.